This is the Grand Canyon Hiker Dude Show, presented by Hikin. Hiking plus kinship. That's Hikin. Together we roam. Here's your host, my hubby, and co-founder of Hikin, Brian Special.
Okay, a quick update on the Dragon Bravo fire, and then a conversation with Krocky Meshkin, a longtime Grand Canyon tour guide and shuttle driver who's familiar to many of you. We'll start to get some perspectives from those most affected by the fire. That is in just a bit. First, the update from this morning is that in spite of the significant rainfall from the monsoon storms yesterday evening on the South Rim, the North Rim, and specifically the fire itself, well, it just didn't get much. It didn't get enough. So it was somewhat disappointing to hear today that we're still at 0% containment, and the Dragon Bravo fire has now burned almost 9,300 acres, with 529 personnel assigned to fight the fire. There is some good news far below the rim at Roaring Springs. Yesterday, we reported that a heli-tac team was being inserted at the pump house down there to begin defensive measures should the fire continue to make its way to the bottom of the canyon. Roaring Springs sits about 5.5 miles and 3,600 vertical feet below the North Kaibab trailhead and provides water to both the north and south rims. And it came as a shock yesterday to learn there was any kind of threat that deep in the canyon. Rob Roy Williams is the section chief of the firefighting team.
We flew some heli-tac guys over to the Roaring Springs pump house. They were able to go in there and complete some defensible space around there. They're going to go back in there today. They're going to put some structure wrap around those cabins, as well as put some sprinkler kits in there. So if that fire does decide to threaten that anymore, that we'll be able to protect that value and ensure that fire does not impact that pump house.
Jim King, meanwhile, is the fire behavior analyst. Here he is on the fire's movement in Roaring Springs Canyon.
The good news is the fire behavior around the remaining values up here on the rim and then down into the Roaring Springs Canyon where the infrastructure is for the water system on both rims. All day yesterday and then all last night, there was no fire movement in that drainage, further securing those values at risk. So that's very good news on the south side of our fire.
So some good news inside the canyon for the time being. The fire is growing, though, on the north side, and teams were sent to the area around the North Rim entrance station today to secure structures there, much like they did at Roaring Springs.
Late in the day yesterday, had a south wind come across the fire, which pushed the fire to the north, and it grew about 1 mile along the Arizona Scenic Trail. That fire behavior threw spot fires out close to 1/2 of a mile in front of itself. That fire stayed active most of the night last night. As of 4:30 this morning, it was still burning actively. So the key about this part of the fire is it's in very heavy fuels, what we call mixed conifer fuels. So picture large trees and then on the ground, large dead logs that hold heat and are very dry. And so even with a little bit of rain or high RHs, those fuels are still available to burn.
So still a long way to go. It was also mentioned that the weather is expected to dry out again over the weekend and that the fire is expected to start growing again when it does. All right, well, we met Krocky Meshkin in episode 71 of the podcast, and today he's back to talk about his feelings around the loss of Grand Canyon Lodge and how he and others who live at the canyon have been affected by the devastation. Krocky lives off the land in Valley, about 20 minutes south of the South Rim. He was a tour guide for years, and in recent years had begun to feel the need for another shuttle service, this one specializing in rim-to-rim. He'd built it into a strong enough business that he was going to pay off his vehicle and be totally profitable for the first time this year. And now this. With access to the North Rim now cut off for at least the rest of 2025, Krocky, like so many others, is being forced to pivot. Life, it's been proven with this situation, can come at you fast. It was a week ago today, that this fire was still essentially a controlled burn on the North Rim. I'm sure from your vantage point on the South Rim, you could see the smoke, but we weren't worried about anything becoming anything like what has happened since then. You know, a week ago, people were still staying at the North Rim, staying at the Grand Canyon Lodge, doing their rim-to-rims. The trails were open. And now, a week later, everything has changed. And I'm just curious what this whole week has been like for you.
We've all been incredibly shook. This did happen so fast. You know, that's insane to think about. A week ago, people were still over there. And all that sort of prompts these emotions of grief, shock, anger, everything coming out. And yeah, I'm still wrapping my head around all this. It's been a very wild week.
What was it like, and what were you hearing as the evacuation orders started to come in? Because you've been a member of the Grand Canyon community for a long time now. I'm sure you have friends on the north side. What was happening? What were you hearing as the evacuations began?
The evacuations began on July 11th. That's when I got the first, mass text. They're asking visitors to leave. And suddenly I'm thinking, okay, you've got the two fires. So the White Sage fire is the one closer to Jacob Lake, and that's possibly going to block the exit point. That's initially what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, okay, there's this other fire on the North Rim, but it's not that bad. There's not cause for concern. There's this bigger one by Jacob Lake that is prompting the evacuation of the visitors. And I'm thinking, well, I'm probably going to have the week off. I probably won't do much driving this week. And, I was ready to just accept that and have a week off, and didn't think it was a big deal at that point.
Were you hearing anything from the people that you knew on the North Rim as they, you said the visitors got evacuated first. I think it was later the same day where you got the go notice that it's time for everyone to get out. And that is the first indication that we had that the Dragon Bravo fire, the one that affected and is affecting to this day the North Rim and now down into the canyon, that's the first indication we got that something was really, really wrong.
Yeah. They started to evacuate all the staff, and I wrote down a timeline because even my head is like tripping out over all this stuff. When I scanned back through my phone, the visitors were one day, and then that night it was kind of like, okay, this is interesting. The next day, I remember getting set. They say set, you're in set position, prepare yourself because you might need to evacuate. And I should be clear, I'm not on the north side at this point. I'm on the south side while I'm getting all these texts. So this would have been July 12th. The staff is asked to evacuate very promptly. It goes from set, and then I feel like it was maybe an hour or a couple hours later, it was a go order, evacuate now. I was waiting because I thought I might possibly get calls. On the day that the visitors were asked to evacuate, I did get a call that day, somebody needing a ride. It was a couple of hikers on the South Rim. They were going to rent a car, and so I was driving them to Flagstaff on that day so they could go to the airport and get a rental car. And I was just, I thought maybe people are going to be calling me. Maybe I'm going to rush over there and help. And it also was a balance of maybe I'm just going to be in the way. Maybe they're evacuating these people. They're trying to get all the vehicles out, everything. I wasn't going to go over there without somebody asking me for help or asking me to go over there at that point.
So what was it like when, you wake up Sunday morning, I assume, if you'd even gotten sleep, and now we're talking about we've lost the Grand Canyon Lodge. And, the night before, as we all went to sleep, I think that, at least for me, you could start to see on the map that it was inching closer and closer to the lodge area, but it still wasn't there yet. And then we get up Sunday morning and find out that at about 3:00 in the morning, the Grand Canyon Lodge was lost. What was your reaction?
Initially, it was just shock. It was disbelief. And I do want to say, getting in all this stuff, so much respect to the crews that were fighting this fire, that had their lives on the line. So much respect to these people. I'll back it up a little bit. I want to get into the lodge with you. I want to talk about that day before. So July 12th, everyone's evacuating. I'm seeing from friends. I have a friend who left for the Bryce marathon. He had actually left, and he put a post online. He said, "It's not looking good for the North Rim." And that really made me wonder. This is one of my friends. He's just an incredible Grand Canyon hiker. He's done over 50 summits in the canyon. And he says it's not looking good for the North Rim. Coming from this guy, I was like, what is he talking about? What is that? Like, on what level does that mean? July 12th, I had gone to, some friends had a sort of a delayed 4th of July party for the community. For anyone who was out of town for 4th of July, they all got together. So that was Saturday night, July 12th. I'm at a party. I'm excited. I'm telling people about this lifestyle that I have now. Essentially, I'd created my shuttling company in 2023, but I held on to other employers while that took off. It wasn't until late last year that I decided to go all in with the shuttling company. And I was basically explaining to them, I said, I think I have a job that I don't have to have concern about AI taking my job or anything like this. Like, to drive that route rim to rim, anyone who does that, TransCanyon, other companies, these are great drivers. Those are winding, twisting roads, everything. I'm not going to see a Waymo doing that route, right? So I'm thinking I got total job security the next 5 to 10 years. I found something special. And that was the vibe. That was the vibe at the party. Everybody I knew, we're chatting. There was smoke everywhere. There was smoke in the air, but nobody, there was no feeling on Saturday night that the North Rim Lodge was going to burn down, that the North Rim was then going to be closed for the remainder of 2025. There was not that feeling that night. It was a sudden blow on Sunday morning.
And this is a bunch of Grand Canyon people. You guys are in the know. You're communicating with each other. There was no indication on Saturday night other than the fact that, you maybe are starting to see the fire inch toward the lodge. But it was even hard to fathom then as it got closer that, well, surely it's going to be protected and surely this can't happen. That's the vibe that you all had at that party.
Yeah. And just knowing the topography, it's on a peninsula. It's right out there on a peninsula that, I think, for one thing, it shows you how big the fire had now built up to be. And the conditions, insanely dry, insanely hot. We're in a heat wave this week. And the combination, for that to continue down, this peninsula that has a huge parking lot, that has places that could be set up to fight it, was just, it was unbelievable. And the photos came out. So there was a call for the locals and residents. We were on a group call getting information direct from the Park Service on Sunday morning. We got
so what happened Sunday morning? Let me just back up just for a second, because you go to this party. I assume you leave this party at some point. You probably go back and go to sleep. And is it when you woke up the next morning that you found out what happened?
Yeah, and not even. I think
and you had no inkling the night before, and then you wake up in the morning and the lodge is gone. And what's your reaction?
Completely gone. Complete disbelief. The photos coming out, that was the evidence. That was like, okay, this thing has burned. And those photos just started passing around. Like, I saw those fly from page to page to person so quick. Everybody was talking about it. So that's Sunday morning. We're still kind of digesting it. It's like the grief. It's like the loss of a loved one. You lose that, and you're in this state of shock suddenly, where like, it's like you think, like, you blink your eyes. You're like, no, that didn't happen. It's still there. We're still gonna go over there. That, and it takes days to process that. That was when I started getting calls from people that don't even live at Grand Canyon. Was the 13th. That afternoon, it seemed to blow up to now national news.
When did that mindset start to, I don't know, when did it start to shift for you? Because, not only are you someone who is obsessed with the Grand Canyon and has been part of the community for so long, you've got your livelihood tied directly to the Grand Canyon and tied directly to folks' ability to access the North Rim and to be able to do rim to rim. That is your clientele. That's your livelihood. So how long did it take it for you to your mindset to just shift and be like, wow, wait a second. This isn't just a tragedy that is, affecting Grand Canyon Lodge and everything on the North Rim and all the people who live there, but now my livelihood is affected too.
Yeah, it wasn't the initial thing. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't like my business, my money, that kind of stuff. It was so much the people, the friends that lost everything, the friends on the North Rim that had to evacuate and leave stuff behind. Thinking about the ecosystem, the North Kaibab Trail. And suddenly realizing it was beyond that. We thought the lodge was one thing, and then we're realizing this is actually hitting the North Kaibab trailhead. And that sort of started to come in by the end of the 13th, the 14th, that I'm realizing rim to rim is never going to be the same. I'm potentially not going to be able to operate. And in order to run a business, I should clarify too, for people who don't know me, I'm probably one of the last small business owners to operate on the North Rim of the Grand Canyon. You have the lodge, and all the structures are owned by the Park Service, but you have people, companies come in and they operate the lodge. They operate the general store. For me, I had gotten my authorizations through the National Park Service to operate as a small business, and you have to pay all kinds of fees to do that. My insurance is over $500 a month to do those drives. The Park Service wants me to be insured up to $1.5 million in case I were to cause some damage to the Grand Canyon. In case I were to back into the North Rim sign and destroy it, I'm paying out these insane fees. That's the stuff that started to, hit me eventually, was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be making any money, and I'm going to have to call a shot. Basically, I could still drive in Arizona. I have all my permitting with the state. However, if I want to stay official with the Park Service, I have to keep paying all of this overhead to the Park Service. And it's possibly going to be over a year, before I'm doing that kind of business again.
So what did you decide to do? Have you made any decisions about your future?
I think there's options. I have to hold on to this belief that there's options. For me, the Grand Canyon changed my life. When I arrived to Grand Canyon, I had 3 maxed out credit cards. I had been making $8 an hour, and I was driving a van that cost me $800 when I showed up to Grand Canyon 10 years ago. My life was really bad. I was really struggling to survive, and I got this job at Grand Canyon that essentially pulled me out of debt, pulled me out of, poverty. I was, instead of having a budget of like $20-$30 a week for food, suddenly I felt like I was living like a king. I was working at Pink Jeep Tours. I was learning about geology, and I was learning about biology and flora and fauna, and I was making really good money. And the Grand Canyon, like, I need to put that out there. The Grand Canyon saved my life. It changed my life. I essentially had to start over, at the time I moved here, and things went so well. And it just kept, getting better and better throughout the years. I had a plan to start this business, and the business was my way of creating my own schedule. When you work for the other companies around Grand Canyon, you're asked to work all the holidays. You're giving away your summer. You are essentially, helping people to have a great vacation, and you're not getting to do that yourself. And this year looked like a year that I was going to be able to improve my quality of life. I took a vacation for 4th of July. My last time to the North Rim was July 1st. I had worked with a group on July 1st, and this was the first year in 10 years that I took a vacation on 4th of July weekend which ironically is when that lightning strike happened.
So have you made a decision on what's next for you?
Sorry. I
It's a lot, Krocky. This is
it's
a lot to keep straight in your mind. It's a lot to talk about, man. It's emotional. It might be infuriating in some regards, but
yeah.
you've got to move on. So what's next?
And for the listeners at home, my laughter is not like I
We
have to like
understand.
find some humor in all
It's
this.
okay.
Like
Yes.
it's,
Levity above all, Krocky. Puts us through a lot of dark times in life. Don't you worry about that at all.
yeah, I have to find some humor in this. There's nothing defined for my future. I have options, and I think what it looks like is I'm going to shift into documentary filmmaking. I had hiked rim to rim with a retired NASA engineer who lost his vision due to glaucoma. We did rim to rim with him last year. And I got permits through the National Park Service to film that whole thing because he wanted his story told. He wants to inspire others who have a family member or are losing their vision and show them that even once you've gone blind, you can still do cool things like rim to rim. So he actually, it was over a week ago. It was before 4th of July weekend. He had invited me. He's going to go for a world record, the largest group of blind people to summit Mount Kilimanjaro. And so they invited me on that to document their journey. And there's 11 of them. So they do have a plan to kind of pull together money and find a sponsor for this doc. And so I haven't quite got the green light on it, but it looks very possible that, that was just going to be a trip. And I have clients booked all the way September, October, November this year. Many of those clients I've been on the phone with, I've been texting with, I've been calling them. Of course, some of these people have never even seen the Grand Canyon. They were planning rim to rim this year, and that's not going to happen. My plan was I was going to go do Kilimanjaro, come back, and finish out my business for the year before diving into the dock. So, as troubling as everything is, and also just allowing myself that space of allowing time to process, allowing time to think about it. It's likely that I will dissolve the shuttling portion of the company and then dive into the documentary, put the full focus on these two docs.
You say dissolving the company with an eye toward coming back when things change, or what?
Well, the funny thing is, I purchased rimtorimshuttle.com. I was so confident in the company. I said, I ought to claim that. Nobody's going by just rim to rim shuttle. And mind you, I set out to do tours. Originally, I had the CUA, the commercial use authorization to do road-based tours and trail hiking, and I just struggled to advertise that. And so this year, I only got the authorization to shuttle people. I do not have the ability to give people tours this year. And now this happened. If I had that authorization, when you apply for these things with the Park Service, that cutoff happens at the end of March. And so that's it. I cannot give people tours. With 10 years of knowledge working as a Grand Canyon expert, I could get a job with another company, but I'm not going to be able to do that through my company. So yeah, it looks like it would make the most sense to just stop operating. And it's one of these things. They're saying close for the rest of the year. I think I have to err on the side of caution. We have to consider it's not just rebuilding, it's going to be cleanup. They're possibly not going to let any citizens in there because of some of the toxic materials that could have been spread about from the burning of some of these structures. Wastewater treatment plant, we know for sure, was one of the structures damaged. It's possible they're not going to let citizens in until all that cleanup has occurred. Then I know there's been a lot of talk too. I mean, everyone's throwing out great ideas of like a temporary lodge, or maybe they can just allow access to the trailhead before a new lodge is completed. So yeah, I think I would just be wasting money. I'd be paying out money that it would be better to let this one go, and whenever things are back up, see about coming back as a new design, a redesign myself.
Isn't it something that we're talking about, all this future plans, and not just for you, but what the future might look like for the North Rim, that we're talking about this while this fire is still, we found out this morning, it's 0% containment, 9,300 acres, growing, still penetrating deeper into the canyon, where it becomes more and more difficult to actually fight the fire. It seems like that part of this is being, not really reported. It seems like the national media, even the media here in Phoenix, are just focused on the lodge still. A few days later, they're focused on the North Rim. They'll say the fire burning on the North Rim. And you just kind of want to scream and say, guys, this is in the canyon. And we can tell by looking at the maps that it has ravaged the upper portion of North Kaibab, of the North Kaibab Trail, all the way from the trailhead down to Supai Tunnel, the best we can tell. And there are hell attack teams now who are protecting the area around the pump house, which of course is just north of Manzanita, between Manzanita and Roaring Springs. And that is staggering to even think about, that fire is, working its way down, not necessarily down the trail parts itself, but, if you don't know, the lodge is basically right above Roaring Springs and Roaring Springs Canyon. So the fire that was in the lodge area is working its way down the canyon right there. That's its fastest route to get to the bottom. But the fact that we're even having this conversation is pretty stunning. And the fact that we're talking about people changing their livelihoods, and we're, coming up with fundraisers and T-shirts, and this fire is still burning. How crazy is that to you?
Yeah. 0%. It's burning. It's growing. I would love to see more of that covered. I had been asked to do an interview for ABC 15 yesterday, and that aired last night. And I probably got, out of what they interviewed me, I maybe got 10 words in, made the cut. So that was cool that they gave exposure, and they interviewed some other people around the park and people at Jacob Lake. All the exposure is very welcomed right now, because it's not just me. I want to be clear, it's not just about me and my company and all that stuff. There's so many people with loss. So to talk more about the current situation, this fire is growing. It's going into the canyon every night. The past couple nights at least, I've been up there. If you stay after the sun sets, the flames come into view. You're watching the smoke as the sun is setting. As the sky gets darker and darker, boom, the orange flames come into view. And that was absolutely devastating the other night. I don't think I could have done this interview a couple days ago without having that time to kind of swallow that. You can see it right back behind Buddha Temple. This would be near Woodforce Point. If anyone's done the Woodforce Trail on the North Rim, that's going to be all fried. This is, you mentioned it flowing to like Roaring Springs and that kind of stuff. That one's going to be the Transept Canyon. Is, when you step out of the parking lot and there's that little sign, it says Transept Canyon. I'm talking about the parking lot on the north side. A lot of visitors, I see this all the time. Visitors step out and they think they're seeing the Grand Canyon. But there's a little wooden sign there. It says Transept Canyon, and then it says Grand Canyon View with an arrow. It's trying to tell people, hey, this is just a side canyon. But that one, all that stuff dumping, the ash and debris dumping into the canyon as well. It's growing. Storms started arriving, which I want to get into that in more detail. But now we have the situation of rain that is possibly going to wash some of the materials of these structures into the canyon.
Well, you posted something on Facebook this morning, and I encourage everyone to follow Krocky. You mentioned the rain, and you had a pretty poignant moment last night, it looked like to me, where a lot of introspection, and you went for a run along the rim trail as these thunderstorms rolled in, and we got heavy rain. I think we're all a little disappointed to see the briefing this morning and still see the 0% containment. So perhaps the thunderstorms had some effect on the fire, but not nearly to the extent that we were hoping for.
Correct. Yeah. Last night was wild. I can walk you through that one. Essentially, I wasn't going to go back up. I felt like I needed a break from it. And that's sort of been the psychology of like, do I watch this? Do I just go to Flagstaff and ignore this? What do I do with these days? And I sort of had a moment where I was like, I think I need to just bear witness to all this. I think I need to go visit with my friends. North Rim employees have now been brought over to South Rim, some of them. And, I spent the past few days visiting with other employees, other tour guides, essentially tour guides on the South Rim that they're not affected as their job, but you can imagine what it would be like to have to go out and give a tour to excited visitors who've just shown up and you're dead inside. You are so depressed and you're having to put on a show and give a tour to these folks. I witnessed that yesterday. One of the Park Service interp rangers was giving a geology talk while the fires are happening right behind him. And he definitely acknowledged it, but you could feel it in his voice of like, you imagine everyone having to continue to work on the South Rim as they are hearing the stories of their friends, possible family members, people who they don't know what's next. They don't know how long it's going to be till they can go back to that culture and that lifestyle of living on the North Rim.
I imagine that the emotions, we've talked about it, I've just kind of run the gamut for you across the entire spectrum. I'm sure there's sadness. I'm sure there's some anger. You have to have some optimism as you look forward. So many things going through your mind. What is the overriding emotion for you right now?
I think the overriding emotion for me is empathy. I have to have empathy for people, for the ecosystem, the forests, the biology, the animals. I have to have empathy. I've kind of gone through, the classic stages of grief, the disbelief, the anger, the rage, all that stuff. I've definitely gone through that, and a lot of my friends, we've had conversations where, these conversations were like, this is just us talking. We need to get all this stuff out. This is not stuff we necessarily would want to put on record, but just to talk some of that anger and grief out. I've been going through all that stuff, especially with friends, and now I think it's all about empathy. I had gone up to do the interview with the news yesterday. I decided to stay up there, and I decided to do one of my favorite runs on the top of the canyon is running along the Trail of Time. You park at Yavapai Geology Museum, and you can run along all the rock layers without the madness of dropping into the canyon. You can have yourself just like a nice little 5K run. And so I decided to do that even though the storms were coming in. And I had a very spiritual moment as the rain got stronger. I was now in between Yavapai Geology Museum and the Grand Canyon Village area. The rain gets heavier and hail starts falling. Thunder is echoing throughout the canyon. Giant storm clouds are right overhead. The smoke is in the distance on the North Rim. As I get to about Verkamps, lightning is now flashing, more hail, more rain, and I decide I better go stand on that porch. I I knew I was going to get wet, so I didn't wear a shirt, so I couldn't go inside anywhere, and I kind of screwed myself over in that way. Um, but I just wanted to be in it. I just wanted to feel the rain. I needed an emotional moment because I was getting so tense and so angry about everything. I needed this sort of release and this emotional moment. I end up standing on the porch at Verkamps. So Verkamps is that little gift shop run by the GCC that's close to El Tavar Hotel. And that thing is older I believe that was over 100 years old. That's older than the North Rim Lodge was. And it was fun to stand on, a piece of history, watch the smoke on the North Rim, the rain's coming down. There was a very calming feeling. There were tourists around that were, they were just reading books. I don't know if they had hiked the trail a time. They're going to wait out the storm and hike back. But yeah, they seemed so relaxed, and to just be around that kind of energy, even for a moment, felt good. A GCC employee stepped outside of her camps, and he was poking at or peeking at the fire, looking over to the smoke. And just then it seemed it was hitting the Dragon Bravo fire area, the Woodforce Point and that plateau and the peninsula. And I looked on my radar, and sure enough, it was. We've seen that too. All the posts on your Facebook page and everything, that the rain arrived, a nice dousing of rain hit. The smoke was turning more of a white color, and flames were bursting out. Big orange flames that we're looking with the naked eye at this point, over 10 miles away. Giant flames were bursting out as that rain hit, and then the flames kind of dying out. Just incredibly symbolic. I then, as the rain calms, I start running back, and those photos you were talking about, the post I did, that was on the run back, because suddenly it was like the limestone was wet, the rain is on the other side. There was such a calming feeling of hope. The literal electricity in the air, lightning was, I forget what you call that, but it was like cloud to cloud lightning was happening. I didn't feel at risk, but it was a little foolish, I'll admit. Running in this storm out there on the edge of the canyon was foolish. But
We're probably thinking, what else could go wrong, right?
Yes, this was my climax moment in the film, where the character is nothing to lose, and and yeah, so I just took it all in, and by the time I got to it's called Grandeur Point, is really close to Yavapai Geology Museum. It's one point that sticks out there, and all these tourists had kind of shown up with their tour guide. They're in ponchos. I'm here shirtless, covered in water, and we all kind of watched the sunset there. And the rainbow came out, and it just felt magical.
And those pictures that you took, those images you captured, you could feel that magic, Krocky, because you posted them in black and white, and that may seem counterintuitive with all the color in the Grand Canyon, but they were serene and just absolutely gorgeous. Some of the best images I think I've ever seen, and I'm pretty critical of those kind of things. I think that was something special, and I hope everyone can go check that out. You mentioned empathy. You also mentioned anger. You just said, you're angry about everything. How do you make those two emotions work together? That can be tough. It's a tough balance.
I've seen great people in my lifetime figure that out. And anyone who can do that is somebody I really admire. To have that passion, to have that drive, yet also lead with the empathy. And I think this is my moment of realizing how I want to come out of this thing. I felt my life was amazing. I felt my life was getting really good. And it was a sudden shock of like, oh my God, I'm screwed. How am I going to make a living? I thought I was moving into a world, where a lot of possibilities were coming my way. I don't have kids. I don't have a family, but, it was looking more clear that even something like that could be a possibility, as well as my life was going. And definitely days of spiral of thinking, well, I don't know what's going to happen now. And so if I were to let myself spiral and let myself get angry and point fingers, it's not going to fix this. It's not going to restore those forests. It's not going to restore the damage to the North Kaibab Trail. It's not going to bring back the history of that lodge, the items in the lodge. Think of the kachinas. There were kachina costumes in there. There were Navajo rugs in the north. They call it the Grand Canyon Lodge. It's very confusing for people that don't live here, I should point out. It's called the Grand Canyon Lodge, but it's on the north side, so some of us call it the North Rim Lodge. We have to have empathy for all that kind of stuff. Is essentially my lesson from yesterday. This was the gift that was given to me in that storm. The rain didn't put everything out, right? We got news that the fire is growing, yet I was able to have this spiritual moment sort of bringing me back to the ground. There's that feeling when you get angry, you get tense. There's a feeling like of numbness. And I felt so much last night as I was essentially just crouched on the limestone, the wet limestone of the South Rim, an ancient seafloor, 280 million years old, that feels like it comes back to life whenever it's covered in water. I'm crouched on there having my moment of just, I definitely agree with folks who want answers, and that's not for me to give. Right? This is going to come down to investigations and whatnot. But yeah, I think this should be covered more. I think people should ask questions. And I think the root of these questions is, how do we make a better world? Because I always imagined I'd be able to show my kids, my grandkids, those trails and those forests, those beautiful aspen, fir, ponderosa pine forests that will now be lost and will take over 100 years, if not 200 years, to return to the state that we saw them in a week ago.
Krocky, thanks for doing this, man. We're rooting for you. We're rooting for everyone up there. There's no doubt it's hard, and there's so many of us in the hiking community who feel the loss. But I think it's important as well to acknowledge that we don't feel it nearly as deeply as those who lived there and are truly part of the day-to-day Grand Canyon family. So thank you for coming on and sharing. It's greatly appreciated, and it helps us, really put the human side to this story. So on behalf of everyone in our community, thank you.
I appreciate that, Brian.